I was 8 or 9 when I first remember thinking, I wish I had been born a boy. It was not because I wanted to be a boy. It was because at that young age, I already knew that boys had access to power, freedom, and choices that I would never have as a girl. Adventure, achievement, and power were the realm of men. Jacques Cousteau, Marlon Perkins, Evel Knievel, and the Crazy Canucks. They all had what I wanted, to be able to explore the world, conquer physical challenges, and obtain the fame and fortune that came with it. The result of this realization was that I began to systemically cut myself off from the feminine aspects of my nature and adopt more masculine traits. I became more focused on competing in sports and at school. I chose friends who were sporty, academically oriented, and competitive. I took every opportunity to challenge my skills against boys, believing that comparing myself to girls was pointless. I was 13 when I started wanting the attention of boys. I learned through trial and error that there was a very fine balance I needed to achieve, attracting enough attention to be noticed, not so much that I would be harassed or demeaned. I needed to dress, groom, and act within a narrow band of acceptability. My teachers, family members, friends of my parents, and parents of my friends all took it upon themselves to offer their judgments, criticisms, and warnings about what I wore, how I did my hair, how I made up my face. My education in grooming was relentless. I was 17 when I was made brutally aware that attracting the wrong kind of male attention could get me killed. That was the year that a very dear friend of mine was murdered 2 blocks from my home, and 3 doors from her own. She was coming home on the bus late at night, the same bus she took every weekday, the same bus I took every week, the same stop that was closest to both our homes. She had been attending a cheerleading practice. She was followed off the bus by a man whose attention she had attracted, the wrong kind of attention. My father drove me to school the next morning before I had learned of Jennifer's death. As we drove by her street, I saw police cars and people standing around. I was curious about what had happened, but I was confident it would not be anything serious. It was between second and third period at school that I found out about Jennifer's death. I collapsed at my locker in grief and shock. How could this be? As we gathered to mourn Jennifer's death, the air was filled with laments. If only she had been on a different bus. If only she had not been so pretty. If only she had known self-defense. If only. No one ever said, if only he hadn't. Over the next few years, I set out to achieve all that I could. I was accepted into a prestigious engineering program at UBC and graduated in the top quarter of my class. I worked at the world's biggest construction site for 2 summers as a student engineer. Upon graduation, I successfully competed with men for a coveted job as an engineer in a large construction company, and I was on track to become a manager of a department there. Yet, when I was 24, I realized that I was incredibly unhappy, and this realization shocked me. I was where I thought I had wanted to be, and yet I had never felt so alone and empty. I've slowly pieced together the reasons why. Every day in my job as an engineer, I was reminded in subtle and unsubtle ways that I was different, that I was the first and only female engineer that had ever been hired by the company, that I would be the test case to decide if they would ever hire another one. In the field during site inspections, I was belittled and harassed. At site meetings, I had to sit in trailers with walls lined with pictures of naked women and try not to feel small and vulnerable. In the office, I was the outsider and found it almost impossible to relate to the middle-aged men that I was being groomed to manage one day. For so long, I had cut myself off from a huge part of who I was in order to achieve my career goals. I had denied myself the freedom of self-expression about who I was, how I felt about things, and what mattered to me. And because I worked in a male-dominated field, I had few opportunities to create nurturing and supportive friendships with other women. Ultimately, I believe the main reason I was so unhappy was the reality that access to power and privilege does not bring happiness, especially when it comes at the cost of the energy, self-denial, and diligence required to play the game, by which I mean shrugging off sexist comments, laughing at sexist jokes, dressing appropriately, and sucking it up when I felt upset or shaken. I want to be clear, I do not blame men for this. I do not blame them for my experiences. We all live in a culture that grants privileges to people who are white, have more masculine traits such as competitiveness, rationality, and individualism, who are cisgendered and heterosexual. Any of us who do not naturally fit in these categories have the choice of either forcing our behavior to conform to these norms or experiencing less access to privilege and power. Privilege is not something we take, and it is not something we can give back. It is an unearned advantage that we gain because we are a member of a specific social group. These advantages come at a cost to those who are not members of the dominant group. For example, privileges that white people have that come at a cost to people of color include role models that look like us, having an uncomplicated relationship with the police, and having my voice carry more weight in almost any social setting. Not having gender privilege dominated the formative years of my life. More recently, a car accident 8 years ago left me with an invisible disability that, among other things, prevents me from working and limits my capacity to participate in social gatherings. And I do hold privilege in many other ways, including race, I am white, sexual orientation, I am heterosexual, economic, I am upper middle class, and education, I have a master's degree. All of us here experience privilege in many dimensions of our identities, and at the same time do not have privilege in some areas. I want you to take a minute and think back to your earliest memories of having to censor yourself to avoid criticism. Perhaps you remember when you were a child and adults told you to be quiet, stop squirming, or stop crying. Perhaps you were bullied as a child and needed to change how you behaved or what you wore to stop the bullying. Perhaps you grew up poor and you might remember a time where you tried to keep this from your friends. What do these memories tell you about your access to privilege? What do they tell you about the experiences of others who lack privilege? There are many cultural beliefs and norms that teach us how to behave in order to maintain the privilege hierarchy and ensure the comfort of those who hold the most privilege. Our ability to maintain this comfort can be a matter of life and death, as is the case of my friend Jennifer and so many young African American males. So adopting these behaviors becomes vital. And they exact an enormous cost to our integrity, our relationships, and our well-being. One of the most entrenched myths in our culture is the belief in meritocracy. When we hold privilege, particularly socioeconomic privilege, we tell ourselves that we have worked hard for what we have. I certainly worked hard to obtain a degree in engineering, and I worked hard to learn and become competent in my job. But have I worked harder than most of the people who have less than I do? Have I worked harder than Alamar, who worked the night shift with my son from 10 p.m. until 6 a.m., then went to his second job as a cleaner for another 8 hours? Then on weekends, he worked a third job, all to pay for rent on a small apartment and food to feed his family. Can any of us honestly say we work harder than he does? Systemic privilege forces us all into a line, from those with the most privilege at one end to those with the least privilege at the other. As we look up the line to those with more privilege, we may feel envious, less than, and sometimes even morally superior to those ahead of us. As we look behind us in line, we may feel guilt, pity, and sometimes even disdain. Our place in line correlates with our ability to mobilize resources to get what we want, whether what we want is as simple as feeding our family and keeping them safe, or as lofty as getting a seat on the Supreme Court of the United States. However, our place in line does not correlate with happiness. While those near the front of the line have easier access to the things that can help us be happy and healthy, it can still be elusive. In fact, many people who hold significant privilege are very unhappy. Privilege is tricky this way. Being in a line creates isolation and separation. So much of our unconscious energy goes to assessing where we fit in this line when we are in a group. Once we find our place in line, we moderate our behaviors to ensure the comfort of those above us. This activity can be exhausting and disconnecting, coming at a high cost to ourselves and our relationship with others in the group. It maintains separation and prevents the kind of deep and meaningful relationships that we all long for. In addition, the line prevents us from having relationships with people who occupy a very different place than we do. A lack of relationships across privilege leads to discomfort when you meet someone who obviously has less privilege than you do, such as someone of a different race. This discomfort usually arises because we do not know what to say or how to relate to someone whose lived experience is very different from our own. And we are concerned that something we say might not be received the way we intended. I want to share an experience I had that showed me how unaware I was of the impact of me being white, the impact that me being white had on other people. I was attending a retreat on diversity and social justice in California. It was the first time that I was in a group in North America where white people were not the majority. Because I have some awareness that in multiracial groups, white people tend to do most of the talking, I promised myself that I would not speak up too much. I kept repeating in my head, "Don't talk too much, don't talk too much." And yet, on the first day of the retreat, the very first day, I spoke up 3 times in the morning sessions. As the evening session started, we were asked to think up ideas for an improv skit. My hand shot up in the air, and I was the first person called upon by the leaders. The next person to raise her hand was Emily, a woman of Bolivian heritage. She described her idea, and then she turned to me and said, "And Kathy, I am so effing tired of hearing you speak. Effing white people take up so much space. Can't you just learn to step back? I am sick of hearing from you." This went on for several minutes. I was mortified. I wanted to slink away and curl up somewhere private to soothe my ego. I had done the very thing I had told myself not to do. Fortunately, this experience occurred within a community that could hold each of us with compassion. For about 10 minutes, I received empathy support from one of the trainers. Once both Emily and I had settled a bit, the whole community gathered around us while Emily expressed all of the heartache and pain she has experienced regarding white people dominating conversations. She shared her despair about all the wise, thoughtful voices of people of color that are never heard when white people are present. As she spoke, I realized that I too was missing out on hearing these voices and learning what I had come to the retreat to learn. It was a beautifully transformative experience for me when I finally understood how my participation resulted in the silencing of so many. I finally understood fully the loss to me of this silencing and how much my actions did not reflect my values. There are two reasons why this experience ended up being meaningful and instructive instead of painful and divisive. The first reason is that it occurred within a community committed to dismantling systemic privilege and holding each other with compassion in the process. The second reason was that I was willing to listen and reflect back what I heard from Emily without defensiveness or shame. I was willing to step into strategic discomfort to learn the impact of my actions and therefore have the opportunity to do things differently in the future. This is how magic can happen. In order to create change, those of us with more privilege must be willing to listen and understand the impact of our actions on those with less privilege. We must be able to hear what is being said without defensiveness or denial. We must be willing to step into this discomfort so that one day we can realize our Unitarian value of justice, equity, and compassion in all human relationships. This is the new front line of the civil rights movement. This is what the Me Too and Black Lives Matter movements are asking of us. This is challenging and scary work, which requires the support and companionship of others committed to dismantling privilege. And where better to find that support we need than within this Unitarian community. We are a community of seekers, committed to accepting and accompanying each other in our spiritual growth, and also committed to social justice both within and beyond our congregation. So how do we move forward? How do we turn this line that we are all forced into an interconnected web of life? How do we create a world where 8-year-old me would not have to choose between being true to myself and being successful? We need to start by being comfortable with being uncomfortable. Building our resilience to learn painful truths about how our actions impact others. We need to be willing to make mistakes and have those mistakes brought to our attention so that we can learn. We must identify where we hold privilege and steward our privilege to create systems that truly represent justice and equity for all. We can embrace consensus decision-making processes, create spaces for voices that are rarely heard, and acknowledge that we are all immersed in a culture that treats certain people better than others. We must hold each other accountable with compassion as we slowly unlearn the beliefs and habits that maintain differences in privilege. This is the work we are called to. This is how we show up with courage, compassion, and conviction to achieve the goal of beloved community for all. These closing words are an excerpt from a poem by Jeannie Shiro, Senior Minister, First Universalist Church, Denver, Colorado. Let the only burning be the fire of commitment in our hearts, minds, hands, spirits, in our community of faith. Live solidarity, use your voice, demand justice. Better, live it into being. Cry out for others to join you. Name hate as hate without shrinking back, without letting embarrassment or false humility or resistance or apologies for white skin get in the way. Direct all that energy to action, standing with, speaking out. Be impassioned. Be indignant about the violence ending of so many Black lives. Precious, precious, precious lives. Be outraged about the burning of houses of worship, sanctuaries of the spirit, sacred communal spaces. Be awakened. Racism is alive. It will never die of old age, ancient though it is. Rather, it must be buried by human awakening to equity incarnate. Demand action from those in power, the press, government, and everywhere. There is no safe place from which to simply observe. All are already involved. Listen more often than speaking. Speak more often than being silent when your words or actions could change the world, even just a bit, in the flesh, in real time.